And a good Thursday afternoon. Thanks for joining us here on NewsNation Now. I am Aaron Nolan. If you take a look at your screen, our focal point today in an exclusive interview, an exclusive story to NewsNation Prime, is Harvey Weinstein. He was convicted in 2020, but tonight we have got a very special look, an interview with Jessica Mann, one of the women who accused Weinstein. Let's take a look at that story.
Harvey Weinstein has submitted an appeal. He says he did not receive a fair trial and that his constitutional rights were violated. How do you respond to that?
I almost find the situation laughable.
Why is that?
It's just so typical. He's looking for the loopholes, anything he can find, and at this point it's not a surprise. It's the 100+ voices of women who never knew each other, who never spoke, who lived in the dark and hid this shame and dealt with this trauma, attest to the fact that this man is not innocent. So he's delusional.
This story runs tonight on NewsNation Prime. That is 8:30, 7:30 Central on NewsNation. Our investigative reporter, Rich McHugh, joins us now. Rich, you were able to put this story together. First things first, what was that emotions like, being able to sit down with Jessica and talk about something that was so difficult for her in her life?
Thanks for having me, first of all. It was, you know, I've been speaking to Jessica since the start of the trial, so that's over a year now, and you know, she didn't make this decision lightly. This is something that she has been very deliberate about, and right after the trial, she did not want to speak, and she didn't speak, and she, you know, it's been a year, and nobody has heard from her, and she's been very focused on her own healing and process, and just trying to kind of get away, frankly, from the media and the whole trial. And so for her to come out now, I think is a big deal. I know it's a big deal for her, and she's doing it for a very specific reason. She's been working behind the scenes on a topic that was central to this trial, which is the topic of consent, the definition of consent, because it was always Weinstein's position and the defense's position that this was a consensual relationship. When Jessica Mann was called as a witness, that's what they tried to point out. And her position is that no, it was not, and that's why she's now focused on trying to get. There's a bill that has been just introduced last week, trying to get that bill passed, and the focus of that bill is to clearly define what consent is, whether this is for workplace or whether this is for sexual assaults, you know, relations between men and women, because when it goes to a judge, in penal code right now, there is no definition of consent.
Something that is no doubt important. If you're just now joining us on Facebook or maybe your station's Facebook page, your favorite local television station, this is NewsNation. You can watch this story with Rich and what he was able to do coming up tonight on NewsNation. Go to newsnationnow.com to find out more information about how you can get our television station. But I want to break down this story, Rich. I was able to watch it earlier today and preview the story. It's a fantastic piece. A lot of hard-hitting questions in there, a lot of emotion, and we talk a lot about emotion, and sometimes in trials they're not emotional. Lawyers don't really get into that. Attorneys can't really get into that emotion. Jessica Mann did not hold back when she spoke to you about this. It was extremely emotional. It was very difficult. Tell me about the question when you asked her about addressing Harvey Weinstein, when she had to stand there on the stand and identify Weinstein.
Yeah, so I asked her, you know, there was a part where she was talking about how grueling it was being on the stand for 3 days and the cross-exam. And I said, did you ever have to, you know, look at him directly? Did you ever look at him directly? And her answer kind of shook me. She said, yeah, I looked at him and his eyes were completely black and beady. And she was like, it shook me to my core. And she was almost like shaking even just thinking about it. And so you know that like this was something that was quite, you know, reliving the whole experience just in the conversation that we had was traumatic.
Well, and I think she used the word overwhelming in that moment. And you can imagine testifying before a jury, before a judge, before the world, accusing this man of what he was eventually convicted of. But again, talk about that difficulty that Jessica Mann had on the stand. It wasn't easy. She actually had a moment where she broke down. And then in the piece, in your story, she talked about PTSD from this whole experience.
Mm-hmm. It was a pivotal for the reporters that covered it. I was there. I mean, it was a pivotal moment in the trial.
Yeah.
When it was, I believe the second day when she was on the stand, and she was being cross-examined by Donna Rotuno, his defense attorney, and she lost it, and they had to adjourn for the day, and her cries were heard from a back room, and everybody in the courtroom heard this, and the press the next day, that evening, seized on that and questioned whether her ability to move forward, and so she talks about that in great detail. You know, we dive into that, what happened, what prompted that, and yeah, it was traumatic for her, and she's been working through that. You know, it's not just the trial. There was years prior that she's been dealing with this. Nobody knew about her. You know, when she appeared at the trial, she was like the star witness out of nowhere. You know, having covered the Weinstein story for as long as I have, you know, we were all kind of asking, like, who is Jessica Mann, and what is this story? And so she turned out to be the linchpin of the trial, and but it was that moment that really kind of shook everybody in the courtroom, and was like, wow, this is, you know, can she continue? And to hear her describe it is quite something.
So we always hear when we do these stories as journalists that the victims have to go through it again, have to relive it again as a witness in a case like this. Has she recovered from, first and foremost, the tragedy of what she went through and then having to relive that again? Has she been able to compartmentalize and grow from that point of the outburst that was heard in court?
Well, I don't want to speak entirely for her on this point,
Sure.
but my assessment of her, having spoken to her right after the trial and now, is that yes, she is doing much better. She is continually working on this. She's working through trauma with specialists, working through PTSD from the trial and from the experience, and so it's all kind of lumped together. But she is taking it extremely seriously, and you know, such that she wants to be a model for how this can work for other women who come forward with similar experiences.
Rich, you brought up a great point. If you're just now joining us on NewsNation now, we're talking about the trial of Harvey Weinstein, and one of the star witnesses that Rich McHugh, our investigative reporter, has been able to chat with. We're going to have that story tonight, 8:30, 7:30 Central on NewsNation, that post-Me Too movement. And she mentioned that in your story of, yes, she went through these traumatic experiences of not only the original crime, but also having to relive it in court. But she's using that to make a difference. How is she doing that in what she called the post-Me Too movement?
I think the way she's processing this all is she made a decision, and she wrote about it in what's called her victim impact statement, which she read to the judge before the sentencing. And I think it was, you know, I'd characterize it as a vow she made to other survivors that she's going to kind of lead the way and show how this is possible and how she can make change. And for her, she's narrowly focused on this topic of consent and trying to get that bill passed. And so so there's no gray area, whether it's in corporate America or whether it's in, you know, at a party and there's alcohol involved. Consent is where she thinks we're going to go. The topic of consent needs to be addressed in the post-Me Too era.